He's Howard Ibach, author of 2 books on creative briefs.
And he's David Moore, freelance creative director. And together, we are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about advertising, creative briefs, and briefing. David, we're back for another episode, and thank you for joining us again as a co-host, because Henry is doing his best to escape Hurricane Milton and doing a good job, thankfully. Today, we have a special guest, an old friend of mine, Rob Schwartz, a name that I think is well known in our industry. And if you don't know who he is, you're going to love meeting him. Let's join the conversation now. David, we're back with another episode of the Brief Brothers. Today, we have an old friend and my former boss, Rob Schwartz. He has been an industry leader for decades. And I met him first at Team One Advertising, where he was my boss, my direct creative director, and he reported, I believe, to Tom Cordner. I liked Rob. I don't know if I cared that much for Tom, but because Tom used to always come back to by my office and ask me, how are things in direct marketing? Oh. So I kind of got the impression right off the bat that, but in any event, Rob has been creative director, executive creative director, chief creative officer, CEO, chair, and is now the first official in-house executive management coach at TBWA Shy Day in New York. And he's our guest today on the Brief Brothers. Rob, it is so good to see you. It's been a long time. Welcome to the Brief Brothers.
Yeah, great to be here. Great to be here. Yeah, one clarification. I do executive coaching across all of TBWA, across the what we call the TBWA collective. So that includes all TBWA branded companies and places like Lucky Generals, 180, GMR, places like that.
Well, they are blessed to have you, and I hope they're taking advantage of your experience.
So, well, works both ways.
I'm sure that many of our viewers know who you are, but for the sake of those for whom you are now a new presence, I want you, as we usually do on our show, to take a moment and share with us what was it that drew you to this industry of advertising, and give us a brief background of your career trajectory. How'd you get started, Rob?
All right. Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and I think this is a valuable and terrific podcast. My advertising story, of course, starts with failure. I was a failed novelist, a failed screenwriter, a failed lawyer. So what else are you going to do? I literally walked out of the LSAT on like question 38. And I never looked back. I was going to go to law school, and I was just in the middle of the exam, and I was like, what am I doing here? And I wound up going on something called Outward Bound. And I did about a month in a place called Hurricane Island, Maine. And I learned how to sail in an open boat, and I overcame some fears of rappelling, and learned how to portage a canoe and all kinds of stuff. And I came back to New York City at the time, and that's where I'm from. And I was going to write the great American novel. There was a book called Bright Lights, Big City by Jay McInerney, and another book called Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis. And I thought, there has to be a trilogy. I'm going to write the third one of these amazing coming-of-age novels. But that didn't work out. But I wound up getting a job at Simon & Schuster. It was the worst job I've ever had. I made no money. It was mind-numbing. But I used to write some kind of monthly or weekly newsletter for internal, like some sales report thing. And this woman saved my life. Her name is Diane Lamonaco. And she said, you're a good writer, and I've got a friend who teaches at the School of Visual Arts. His name is Tony Romeo. He teaches an advertising class. You might like it. So I went down there. Tony Romeo was a longtime great art director for DDB at the time. And it was amazing. I took his class, and I took a class with the late, great Sal DeVito, and I thought, this is for me. And that got me in the business. And from there, I got a job at a small agency called Altschiller Reitzfeld, which was famous for a great Boar's Head campaign before Boar's Head had all their issues with the line pure baloney, not phony baloney. And it was an agency that you really learned to write headlines. And from there, I wound up going to California. I actually really wanted to work at Team One. They didn't have any job openings, but I wound up getting a job at Hill Holiday. And I worked there for 6 months to the day. Got laid off when they lost the Infinity business to a company called Chiat. And then that weekend that I was laid off, I sent my book to Team One, to Tom Saputo, the late great Tom Saputo, who was running the sort of the direct promotions group. And he said, "You want to freelance?" And I got in, and I never left. I started freelancing there, and wrote a lot of email, and did a lot of unglamorous stuff, which I love to do. And it caught the eye of Tom Cordner, and I wound up replacing a guy by the name of Chuck McBride. So Chuck went off to Wyden, and I replaced him. And I was there at Team One for a while. Then I went up to San Francisco to a place called Mandelbaum Mooney Ashley. They were eventually bought out by BBDO. And I was about to take a job in New York at Ogilvy. And Tom Cordner got wind of it. He goes, don't go to Ogilvy. Come back to Team One. And I came back to Team One, and that's where you and I met. Stayed there for a bit. And then I got a call from TBWA Chiat Los Angeles. And I've been there ever since. And then all kinds of stuff happened there, but that's a lot to take in. So let me pause there.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a career trajectory, and you're breathing some pretty rarefied air, which but one of the things that I've discovered both firsthand, because I worked for you for a minute, and also following your career and talking to others who know you, is how personable you are. You're very approachable. You have this a way with people that I think makes you an amazing and fantastic manager. Where did that come from? Is that something that you learned from your mom, from your dad, from mentors?
I think it's, first of all, I think I like people. People have interesting stories. I think it probably comes from my grandparents. Because we would spend time with them, whatever, on any, given holiday, and on any given weekend. And there were always people around, and there were always people, whether it was uncles or neighbors, their neighbors. And my grandparents always told great stories. And, I was sort of born into a culture of funny, interesting storytelling. So I think for people, it's like, okay, everybody has a story. I'm ready to talk about it. Let's listen.
That's good. So you're talking about your journey, and here's a question I have both for you and for anybody who's younger starting in the business. Did you plan your path? Did it just happen? And then built on that question, which may lead into some of the coaching, how does somebody ascend in the agency or contracting business?
Okay, interesting. So was it planned? I don't really think so. I just wanted to do interesting things. So I wouldn't say that it was necessarily planned, but I always paid attention. So if there was something interesting here, or something's going on over there, let me sort of see what's going on. So I guess I had a natural curiosity, and that curiosity, when you saw something that was going to happen, that client brand relationship is going south. Oh, that seems interesting. I guess I was kind of attracted to fires. It's good to, rather than being arson, I would rather be a
fires.
Yeah. So I don't know how much of it was planned, but it was not meditated, or I guess I'm not using the right word, but I was paying attention. That's about the best thing I can say.
I've in our conversations with, Henry and I meet a lot of people. For the most part, younger people, it might be different, but for the most part, we oldsters found our way to this industry haphazardly. I mean, I was almost 30 when I got my first copywriting job. Henry was going to be a high school history teacher, and
Yeah.
ended up taking a job at an agency because he'd lost a business opportunity, needed something to do in the meantime. Found it was fascinating. So planned, unplanned, it's kind of a common story for us. One of the things that I found interesting, I was listening to an interview you gave about 8 years ago, talking, somebody came into your office talking with industry leaders. And you said something that really fascinated me. Well, you said a lot of things, but one thing I wanted to ask you was that when someone else said no to a project, you raised your hand and said, I'll do it.
Oh yeah.
No one else wants to do this. I'll do it. Where did that come from? Was this part of that natural curiosity you were speaking of?
I don't know the origin story of that. What I do know in hindsight is that it's basically the Sopranos theory of power, meaning, when you look at the show The Sopranos, why did they have any leverage or power anywhere? Was it the muscle? Maybe. Was it the guns? Maybe. The thing that gave them the leverage and the power was the garbage. They were willing to take out the garbage. Meaning they were willing to do the jobs that other people didn't want to do. And when you're in a creative environment, there are the glamour jobs and there are the non-glamorous jobs. And most people don't want to do the non-glamorous jobs. But if you can take a non-glamorous job and make it great, you have unbelievable value to a company. And you have proven something creatively that is of a degree of difficulty that is far superior than doing the next great Coca-Cola project. I'm not saying Coke isn't difficult. Coke is difficult. But Coke is used to a legacy of amazing work.
Yeah.
Not every brand is that. And if you can do that, then that's the best advice I would give you. Take out the garbage.
Yeah. So that's like the advice I would give to young people in college or trying to build a portfolio. I don't want to see ads about beer and condoms and this and that. I want to know industrial grade lubricating oil or some kind of really obscure product. I want you to know that you can actually do something with that.
Yeah,
that nobody wants.
We've heard some stories from some of our guests where it's kind of on the other side of that conversation, Rob, where it's not I'm raising my hand to do anything, but I'm facing a problem because my creatives have been sent back to the well 2 or 3 times, and some of them just say, I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. And there's someone in the back, someone in the wings who's saying, okay, well, let me try it. These superstars or these more senior people, they say, nah, I'm done. That was my best work. And there's always someone waiting. No, I'll try it. And they end up they crack the nut. They solve it. And that's the difference between the Sopranos and the also-rans, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, when I got to Chiat, Nissan was walking out the door. So this was really not a wonderful job. This was considered, one of the most difficult jobs in the world. But to work at Chiat Day for a day, I was like, I'll do it. That's how bad I wanted to work there. And when you come to find out on this Nissan thing that, it was very difficult, but no one was really listening to the clients at the time. People had been, kind of stonewalled on some things and burnt out. And it was some rough slog in there for a while, but man, it was worth it. It was worth it. And here we are, 25 plus years later, it's one of the, the strongest relationships in the business, knock wood.
Yeah. Well, it's a different breed of agency, and it continues to do great work. That makes the difference.
Yeah.
It was about 8 or 9 years ago, you also said, again, I was listening to this interview, that agencies do 3 things really, really well, better than anyone else in the creative world. 1, they clarify what brands do. 2, they synthesize. They take a lot of information, they synthesize it, and then they simplify that into an idea. And then they were able to package that in a way that people want to hear it. And then that crystallization, the value that agencies bring is that their ability to crystallize that a brand into an idea. Now, the agency world has changed a lot since you had that conversation not quite a decade ago. And I hope I've done your summary justice. Would you say that that's still what agencies bring to the party? Are we still good at doing that?
I think there's still a need for it. I don't know if a lot of agencies still do it. I mean, just to build off what you observed 8 years ago, that wonderful moment of clarity I had, whatever that interview was, I better watch it again. But I do believe that our first role with a client, after you understand how they make money and what they're looking to do, is these four notions: clarify, simplify, unify, and amplify. And I think we're spending a lot of time on amplification. And I'm not sure I see a lot of agencies clarifying something, simplifying it and unifying it. So, but I think there's a need for it, and I think all the work that, it's interesting. We look at the work that makes its rounds on LinkedIn. And to me, it's of two ilks. There's one ilk where it's sort of sensational and kind of cute and charming. It's cute, whatever this recent Heinz thing or Burger King, pregnancy thing. Oh, okay, fine. That's a cute little thing. Or the other thing that we love is we love this sort of big brand crystallization, crack. We love that British Airways campaign, out of Uncommon. And I think I'm attracted to still to this day to the kind of British Airways stuff because it clarified, it simplified, it unified, it amplified. It wasn't just a one-off, execution. So there's still a need for it, to answer your question in a very long-winded way.
So then I'm going to jump on that. Why do we as an industry so much seeming reject the past? The painters study the great work, composers study, filmmakers study. Get a young ad person, they don't know any of these things. Why do we reject that?
Well, I think some of it, David, that's a great point, and I see it rampantly. Some of it is youthful arrogance and youthful ignorance. They don't really know. I put together this presentation. I was very frustrated because I would make a reference to something. I would say, "Oh, this is a comparative campaign. You should make it like Mac PC," and they would look at me like with two heads. What's Mac PC? So I put together a presentation. It's called "The Ads We Talk About When We Talk About Ads." That was the title of it, and it was 10 sort of landmark ads. So if I made a reference like, "Oh, make that thing completely frivolous and silly and outrageous," kind of like a Cadbury Gorilla, they wouldn't look at me like, "Well, what's Cadbury Gorilla?" They had the reference. So it had like 10 milestone campaigns. And then on the last page of the presentation, there was about 50 other ads that you needed to know. And to address what you're saying, it's because they didn't know. And when they're exposed to some of this stuff, you can just see the synapses firing. Their brains completely open up. But we flushed so many of the oldsters out of the agencies that there isn't people who can say, make that a we try harder from Avis.
That's one of the other questions I have is about ageism is the ad business.
Yeah, I was going to ask that too.
Lawyers stick around, doctors, sports coaches. We revere these people with all this experience, but in the ad business, put them out the door. Yeah,
well, it comes down to the finances, and older people are more expensive. And unless I was having this conversation recently, unless you work with finance people who are holistic thinkers and can look beyond, the training and the clarity of numbers. I think it's the same issue with procurement people. Procurement people are just looking, okay, if the screw for the car costs 2 cents, but this supplier can do it for 1.5 cents, we're going to do it because like for like, screw for screw, 1.5 cents is going to work better for the overall cost of the car. Great. But like for like, a graybeard creative director versus, a rising star is not going to have the same like for like on the money. And it's just going to be, unless you're a holistic thinker. And I've been blessed. I worked with a lot of great finance people throughout the years because they were holistic thinkers. They understood the value of what an older person can bring.
It's, you talked in one of your conversations about a concept dear to my heart because it's a definition of a creative brief, the idea of liberating constraint. And that is the definition of a brief. But a senior creative will understand the benefits of having these walls or bars or barriers placed around them because it sparks the imagination. And a senior creative will be able to respond much more quickly. We'll come up with ideas in the fraction of the time that a junior. Now, a junior may come up with some great ideas, but they'll struggle because their muscles haven't been as honed. Their creative muscles haven't been as honed. So I guess what you're saying is the holistic bean counter is a little more attuned to this truth than the siloed or the blind, the one who wears the blinders. And that's.
By the way, I would just jump in that the culture of both the strand of DNA that is Chiat and the strand of DNA that is TBWA, the dinosaurs walked amongst us. It was part of the culture. Jean-Marie Drew wasn't young. Lee wasn't young. When I got to Chiat, Dave Butler wasn't young. Jeff Roll wasn't young. Tony Stern wasn't young. There were Yvonne Smith wasn't young. There were people around who had seen some things. Amy Miano. Yeah. I mean, she was Jay Chiat's third hire. So we were used to seeing several generations around. That was part of the culture. There was another guy, Keith Smith, a great, fantastic person. Adam Stagliano, he's still at the agency today. All these people. This is the culture of the company. So yes, there has been some, movement of let's call it, ageism, but there's something in the DNA of the company as well that says, well, hang on, this is part of our thing,
But Rob, that's not a secret. People know who these talents are, who these names are. I mean, Dave Butler, bless his heart, Dave Butler was the first creative person, senior level creative person to read my book on the creative brief and wrote a review. And I mean, I'd never had anybody review a book that I'd written before. And he gave me this glowing review, and that was a springboard for me. And I'm forever grateful to him. I wanted to work for him. I couldn't get a job at Chiat. Maybe I should have called you up, but in any event, another story. But as I was saying, it's not a secret that these giants worked at your agency. Everybody wants to be, Chiat Day. Everybody wants to be part of TBWA. They see the work that comes from your hallowed halls, but they also see who's developing and creating that work. But in other words, what I'm saying is, it seems to me that they only hear part of the equation. The other agencies who are not, who aspire to be the TBW Chiat Days of the world are seeing only the work, not the culture that produced the work.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I also think it goes back to something that David was bringing up as well. It's just that, are they paying attention? One of the things that when I got into the business, when I got into coaching, frankly, I went to origin stories. I want first principles and I want origin stories. David's whole mission on these agency ads that he pulls out of the ether. It's wonderful to see because these are the origin stories. And one of the things I learned from Lee, and I think a lot of TBWA people will tell you this, is that when you start to work on a brand, the first thing you do is, what's the origin story? That's the purpose we're really looking for. What was the original purpose of this company? And when you look at the origin story, you start to see seeds. Listen, sometimes maybe it's not relevant, but I remember when we worked on the visa business, we pitched it twice, won it twice, which was insane. We stumbled upon the visionary founder, D. Hock. And as part of the founding of Visa, it was about going back to the brief notion, it was about transactions. How do you improve transactions? And looking at that word transaction, we saw the word action within transaction. And that became the genesis of the brief. Visa is for people of action. And when you look at, the best of Visa over the years, BBDO's work, some of the work we got to do through TBWA, it was about these people of action. This was always the brand of like these people doing stuff. And the card was a way, to kind of lubricate those experiences.
Well, let's use that as an opportunity to pivot to the brief, because, Henry and I started this podcast 3.5 years ago on the premise that we're going to talk about briefs, and this is going to be episode 190 something. I don't know. We've been doing this 3.5 years. Who'd have thought we could keep this going that long? I often say in my training, when I do my workshops, creatives will have a very difficult time answering the question, can you recall a great brief in all your years? David will say this, you will say this. I always say the brief that I remember, which isn't to say the other briefs were bad, I just don't remember them. But the one that I remember came from a project that I think you led as creative director at Team One for the rebranding or the reintroduction of the GS 400 production sedan from Lexus. I can't remember anything else about the brief except the single-minded proposition, which was, this is the kick-ass Lexus. And that produced the campaign that became known as Something Wicked This Way Comes. Correct. And I don't recall how that was received by the industry, but I'm pretty sure that it did well. It sold cars. It won some awards. Do you remember that brief by any chance?
I do. And I think you said something really powerful there about what you remembered about the brief, and it was the single-minded proposition. That to me was big. We worked at Team One, which was part of the Saatchi empire, and that was their thing. They were really into that. There were other parts of the brief, of course, but that single-minded proposition was always the thing that we were pushing on. Just the way it was phrased, the kick-ass Lexus. This was a very polite brand, so to have an adjective like kick-ass opened things up. And I think Neil Hewlett was the writer. Maybe it was Jason Stinsmulen who was the art director. I don't recall. But when they came in with the idea of, that comes from Shakespeare, Something Wicked This Way Comes, from Macbeth. We had the language. Okay, that'll be the luxury side. And I think they had an Edward Moray art direction reference. And they wanted to work. I think we shot with Sam Baer, I think was the director. But the confluence of pieces all came from Kick-Ass and Lexus. So when you say like what's important in the brief, well, the words are important in the brief. And the single-minded proposition is the part of the brief in the Saatchi world that is more important than the other parts of the brief. And therefore, that was the diving board for the idea.
Yeah. See, I never called it single-minded proposition, but every good brief that I would write was like, I want to be able to, you can have all those pages that you want for filler, but I want a one-sentence cover sheet. One sentence. What are we trying to do?
Yeah, no, exactly. Sometimes I would look at briefs in my career and I would ask about or think about, okay, given all of this, and now, of course, we have to sit through, a 98-page deck. Given all of this, what's the objective? What are we trying to achieve? And sometimes that question, that's all you need. Just on a car thing, just to maybe, pivot off that or build off that. I always loved the Maxima brief. What was the Maxima brief? The 4-door sports car. Mm-hmm. It was such a great set of words. So you got to play. Okay, I get it. It's a combination of the practicality of a sedan, with the, inspiration and excitement of a sports car. Okay, we can play with that. I don't need more than that.
And that's a place where a good creative team takes that as a starting place rather than so often you see briefs. Okay, that's it. Just meet the brief. No. It's the starting place where you can go when you can think about deliberating constraints. Just this idea. Now get some talented people. Where can you take this idea?
By the way, just to build up that, what I observed about the agency and what was true about Chiat was these clarifying thoughts, these positioning thoughts, was what the agency was very good at. 1,000 songs in your pocket. That was a clarifying thought. That's the brief. You don't
Right.
need more than that. When
And it
we
became
were
the headline.
Yeah, and it's okay. I love John Hegarty's first move when he's working on an assignment. Take the single-minded proposition in the brief. That's your first headline. Visualize it.
Right. If I can,
Right.
he said, it doesn't even have to be a good ad, but if it's good enough, then I've got a good brief, and two, my job as a creative is make it better.
Totally.
Yeah.
And listen, that's I can see that the legacy of the company. The best of what we did has always been a clarifying thought. We worked on the Leaf, for the electric car. It was the new car. I mean, it was just so clear and simple.
Now, we've had Bob Hoffman on our show before, and Bob has this belief that every creative brief that any agency client relationship needs is 3 words. Make us famous.
I like that.
Yeah, I don't. You're a creative. We're all creatives here. It's like if someone handed me that as a brief, I'd say, oh, okay, and now what?
Well,
what else?
I think awareness is really important. I used to have this poem that I would give to clients. I'm trying to remember, but it was basically something like, make me aware, make me care, inspire me to do something, and inspire me to share. Like, that's all we have. That's what we have to do. Sometimes when I worked with these, tech companies or, these companies that are like, we've got a product, we don't need advertising people. I would say, great. Okay. Well, how can we get awareness? How can we make people care? How can we inspire them to buy? How can we make them share something? And it became kind of a poem. So I think the first sentence is make me aware. And I think that's what Bob is saying.
Yeah. He wrote a huge article about that, and I had a little debate. We didn't have it directly because we didn't talk about it that much on the podcast, because I think his article came out later. But I'm seeing this from time to time where we can reduce the brief to just this, and I say, well, yeah, if it's the proposition, yes, I see that. Some creatives respond to the insight if there's a good one. Some, like you said, respond to the objective. And when I see a brief writer who has a way with verbs, can find that perfect verb, as opposed to, we want to build awareness. It's like, you and every other client on the planet. I want to educate. I want to romance you. I want to seduce you. Okay, now you're talking to me in a language that makes me think differently, to coin a phrase. So I'm looking for verbs. And I think some of the best briefs I've come across, and I have a growing collection of these, on the archive, the Creative Brief Archive, the best brief writers are very selective about the verbs that they use, especially when it comes to writing out what is the objective? Why are we advertising?
Well, I think you nailed the brief on the brief for the strategist. If I'm going to hire a strategist, I'm going to use this now. Howard Ibach says, if you're looking for a strategist, look for somebody who's got a way with verbs. Love that.
Well, it's my observation of what I'm seeing. It's not, in other words, it's not a new idea, but if you're paying it, like you said, if you're paying attention, and we have to, that's what we have to be as good advertising people. On our first episode, Henry and I asked the question, what are the qualities of a good brief writer? Henry said it's a writerly document. You have to be a good writer. My answer was, because he stole my answer, he went first, so he took my answer. It's like, okay, now what is my answer going to be? So you have to be a good listener, and not just with your ears, but with your eyes. You have to watch what people are doing. So if you're paying attention, and I started looking at briefs, I've read more briefs than anyone probably should have, but that's kind of the beast, nature of the beast. I noticed that the really good brief writers cared about what verb they used.
Oh, yeah.
When they describe.
By the way, when you reduce disruption down, the 3 disruption, convention, disruption, vision. Vision is a noun. Convention is a noun. Disruption is a verb. I tell people that all the time. I'm like, I'm going to give you the English major version to understand this. Well, two nouns sandwiched by a verb.
That's basically what F. Scott Fitzgerald said. Character is action.
Yeah.
I like your thought about we keep saying everything about reducing everything down. making
Yeah.
it simpler, because my experience has always been the more stuff that's in the brief, the more the creative team will just cherry pick just what they want and fit, and then you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, I go clarify, simplify, unify, amplify. You've got
Yeah.
to simplify it. By the way, John Hunt used to have this great phrase. John Hunt, the great TBWA global creative director, founder of Hunt Lascaris, he would say, "Our job is to make the complex simple and make the simple simply amazing."
Hmm.
That's good.
I mean, come on, who doesn't want that job?
Well, that reminds me of the quote, I think that for which Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, my French is
Mm,
close,
mm,
author of The Little Prince, he said, perfection is not arrived at adding one more thing. It's arrived at by reducing it, by taking away one more thing.
yeah,
So
yeah,
in many ways, a brief is about strategic reduction, not addition.
totally. Yeah,
Absolutely. You take it, you boil everything away until I say it's like making a reduction sauce.
yeah,
Mhm.
Just nothing left, and then you've got something that's really rich and full.
yeah. No, I'm right there with you.
Well, you were mentioning before we hit the record button that you caught my most recent TikTok video where I
Mm,
borrowed something I'd learned from you in one of the interviews that I came across in my prep for this talk today. And this interviewer asked you, what are your criteria for evaluating creative? And you said, I have 3 criteria. The first is obvious. Yes, I get it. The ad is, or the communication or the campaign works. I get it. The second is the opposite. Nope, not going to work. I don't get it. I don't like it. I might even hate it. And you said the third one is the kind of the golden pot at the end of the rainbow. It's rare, but we want to go after it. That's simply, wow. I wasn't
yeah,
expecting this. It touched me in some way. It moved me. I stopped to think about it. It made me laugh. And I said in my TikTok video, that's a great set of criteria for understanding whether you've got a good brief.
mm,
You want the brief, and Henry kind of says a version of this. He says, my goal is to write an inspiring brief.
mm-hmm.
But at the bare minimum, I want a clear brief. Creatives will get clear. But if
Yeah.
I can inspire them, which is your way of saying, wow, that's what I really want. Do we still want, do we still want that in a brief? Are briefs still important to what we're doing in our world?
Well, absolutely. Well, first off, let me just give props to Milton Glaser. So the great designer Milton Glaser, who did I Heart New York, among other things, he came up with yes, no, wow. And his whole thing was, there are only 3 responses you can have to a piece of work: yes, no, wow, aim for wow. And
Well, I
as soon
gave
as
you
I,
credit. I gave you
yeah,
credit for it.
that's okay. Great artists steal. So,
Right.
but the origin story is Milton Glaser. Um, But to amplify something you're saying, I've always believed, and this is something I said, which is you need clarity before poetry. So I need to understand clearly the thing, and then we can make the thing sexy. So that is still important. We still need a brief. There's still something you want to do, whether it's Bob's notion, Bob Hoffman's notion of make me famous. Okay, great. What do we want to be famous for? Let's get clear about that, and now let's turn it into something people really can care about, can go uncontrollably lean forward and just go, wow.
Yeah. Well,
Just one other thing. You said you pulled yes no wow to a brief. When I took over the New York office as CEO at Chi New York, the woman who's running HR said to me, can you give me a criteria for the kind of people you want to hire? And I said, okay, sure. I said, I'm looking for wow people. She's like, what does that mean? I said, people, when you meet them, you go, wow. Like, sure, there's somebody you can interview them. Yes, okay, they meet all the criteria. Their resume was legible and not too many typos. Great. No, we don't like that person. They were somehow, mean, and we knew that they were going to be, terrible at the job. But there are some people you meet them and you just go, wow. And every time, I met somebody who was great, I would put on the resume, I would either say Y, N, or W. And usually if it was a W, I would run into the office and say, hire, she was amazing, bring her in. And in fact, the first 2 people I hired, both Carrie Lipper and Cara Wagner, were 2 wows. I said, we must hire these people.
That's awesome. I try to live on the words that Steve Harrison has said. He says,
Mm.
we're curious people in both senses of the word.
Yeah, perfect. Very Steve.
Yeah, yeah. Good stuff, David.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's David Moore.
He's Howard Ibach.
And together, we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye-bye.